At this point, you can go ahead and bottle because you don't want to bottle before the fermentation is done. Because if you bottle before that, then you're going to have what they call bottle grenades.
Oh
You'll
yeah, wait, was it you that had it like all over the
uh,
floor?
that's happened to me two different times. Two different times. I made a set of dandelion wine once, and I bottled it too early. In the middle of the night, I was hearing pop, 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 pop in the in my closet. And so, like, I look in, and it's just a total mess. Just these the corks were shooting out of the bottles. But I've heard of people actually doing it with, beer bottles, and the actual bottle itself blows up. So then you got like glass everywhere and
Holy cow!
everything. So
Hey, thanks for joining. Had a absolutely great conversation with my brother-in-law, Alex Wallace. Um, we get off on a few tangents and stuff like that, but we broke this conversation up with basically two different podcasts. So the first podcast, we talk about making beer and wine and all that kind of stuff with some things that you can find really in your front yard that a lot of people overlook. And then the other podcast, we talk about soap making and other different products that are really great for the outdoors and stuff. And that second podcast, we had a few drinks, not gonna lie, and so we really kind of loosened up a little bit on that second podcast. Both are absolutely great. Um, but this is podcast 7. The next one is podcast 8, and I highly recommend you listen to both of them. I'll probably release them about a week apart, though, just to give them a little bit of time to get listened to. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this podcast, and like and subscribe. If you would, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, email me at aaron@archeryoutdoorsman.com, and I would love to actually hear your concerns. It's all about making the podcast better and providing you with the best content that I possibly can. So again, that address is Aaron, Aaron, at archeryoutdoorsman.com. Enjoy the show. Good to have you on, man.
oh, thank you.
Salute.
Salute.
Yeah. Got us a little bit of mead. So, really wanted to have you on. You're like the maestro of brewing and mead making, soap making, all kinds of stuff like that. Really kind of eccentric when you have, you know, I don't, I don't know, like everything you do is like really eccentric. It's not normal for a lot of people.
Yeah, usually I take whatever is out there, and then I decide, okay, I'm going to throw this, this, and this, and this in there. But as long as I got a nice base for whatever, then I'm comfortable to jump in and experiment.
Right. So, for those who, well, actually, probably nobody knows who you are. Um, so, I've got my brother-in-law on, Alex Wallace. I really wanted to have him on because he does like so many different things. We've made soap together and all kinds of stuff like that, and mead, wines, beer, all kinds of stuff. But he's also into different culinary aspects, just odd cooking. You've traveled the world and all kinds of stuff like that. So, pretty interesting guy to talk to. So, at least I've always enjoyed our conversations.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
So, why don't you give everybody a little bit of a background on you, like what all you've been through, where you came from, all that kind of stuff.
Let's see. I'm originally from Canton, Ohio. Um, Ended up when I was in college, kind of changed my major a little bit and spent a lot of time in Europe. I lived in Germany for a while. I actually got a second major in German. I also ended up doing my master's degree in Copenhagen. And during that time, I got to see a lot of different things, and a lot of different things meaning culturally, and like what you're saying, um,
Cult?
what?
Did you say cult?
No, culturally, culinary arts,
Oh yeah,
food, different things that you just don't regularly see in the Midwest.
yeah. It's different, right? Going to these different countries and seeing all the things that are really taboo to Americans.
Oh, that's true too. That's
Uh,
true too.
I mean, there's just all kinds of things. What do you think was the weirdest? Well, as an American, what was the most culturally weird thing that you ate when you were over there?
The most culturally weird thing that I ate.
Like you go to Thailand, you might eat bugs or something like that. What do you think was the weirdest thing for you to kind of get around?
Oh wow. Honestly, I don't even know. I mean, it's I've always been pretty open-minded towards things coming my way, where it's like, oh, I'll try that, I'll try that, I'll try that. So there's really nothing that I looked at. I know you don't like shellfish, so
Yeah, yeah.
but
Well,
like I really don't have that taboo when it comes to food or whatever, where it's like, I'm not gonna. I'll always try something once.
let me preface this by saying it's not that I don't like shellfish. It's just to me, it's survival food.
Mm-hmm.
Every once in a while, I'll indulge, and I like it and stuff like that. But I love shrimp, but it's on a as wanted basis.
Yeah. See, for me, shellfish is like the candy of the sea.
Yeah, there's no such thing as candy in the sea.
Coming from a boy from Montana.
Although I do like sushi.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but like in one thing I'm gonna do this year when I go out is and I'm probably gonna get worms or something like that. But I'm gonna eat trout sushi when I go out in the field. Um,
Now you're
back,
gonna dress it up and make it all
that
pretty and
that would
stuff,
be
and
that would be
videotape
something
it. Like,
interesting. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I'll
Get
probably be
like
able to.
a slice of like driftwood, and then just like
Yeah.
lay it out.
Well, the first week I'm gonna be by myself in the Greater Yellowstone, so um, I don't know that I'm gonna be turning my back on too many things. Uh, um, so I might wait for that until Joseph is able to come out in the field a little bit, kind of watch my back. Um, but yeah, so something I wanted to try is like um, just trout sushi and stuff like that, and actually be able to enjoy it. Um, I've had uh, like as survival food, like literal survival food. I've had it as like sushi, but it was kind of one of those things like it tasted really fucking good because I was starving.
Hmm.
I want to like actually enjoy it.
Well, I'm sure with your experience, and I'm an Eagle Scout, so I got that going for me. I'm not the archery outdoorsman here, but I do have some knowledge in the field as far as like plants go, and and all this. It's kind of it's actually a lost art for this
It
generation.
really is. Yeah, most definitely. And that was one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about too, because um, you know a lot about a bunch of different types of plants and herbs, and making, like, I had no idea you could make mead out of rosemary until you had told me about it, and I was like, I'm gonna try that. Yeah,
Yeah.
it actually turned out pretty good.
Well, that's kind of a funny story right there. Um, how did I get into brewing? And how did you get into brewing?
I got into brewing from you.
Yeah, yeah. But like, I mean, it's always kind of the same thing though. Like when a lot of times when you start off, you have some people that are just very much okay. I'm an engineer. I'm a scientist. That type of thing. Everything needs to be specific. And I think I told you the way I started off, and you kind of picked up from that. I found an awesome, awesome book, the Alaskan Bootlegger's Bible,
Yeah,
and
I borrowed that, I think, for like 2 years.
I think you still have it.
I may still have it.
That's all right. You're not the first person that I've lent to, and then I've had to go buy another copy because, yeah, that book, it's like that book to me when it comes to brewing is pretty much priceless for any beginner in that it just touches all bases. It talks about making beer, it talks about making wine, it talks about even touching base on distilling. There's actually a recipe in there for making wine out of milk, which is like okay,
Really?
yeah, like fermenting the lactose, which I have never done. I've never done, but um, be interesting. Um, it's interesting, like, coming back of being an American. We can run to Lowe's, we can run to Home Depot or whatever, and people talk up these foreign countries all the time, right? Well, they don't really have those things, which is strange. These big box stores where you can walk in and you can get everything. So I remember going around on my bike because everybody rides a bike in Copenhagen, and I'm hitting all these different stores trying to find different things. And and this is why the book was really useful, was because what they're teaching you is like actually if you're brewing, like if you're in jail, that type of thing. And so I'm running around trying to find balloons. Okay, cool. I got
A honey bun.
yeah, I'm converting recipes from gallons to liters and that type of thing, which isn't that hard. Trying to find a 5 gallon bucket or 6 gallon bucket, impossible. The only thing I could find was a 10 liter bucket, which is like kind of the equivalent of more than 2 gallons, like 2.5 gallons. But because just being on the metric scale
Yeah.
or whatever, so I had to convert everything there. And like I wanted to start off with something basic, and what it was just brown sugar, brewer's yeast, and water. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to experiment a little bit here, And I threw in some mint. Well, I do it. I do it in my room or whatever, and I've got these balloons that are like popping up out or like on top of the big 1.5 liter bottles that they sell over there, and I have 15 of them to do so.
So for those that don't know the whole process, what is the balloon? What are the balloons for?
The balloons, basically, what I would use them for is you've got, I think it's called an air trap or a fermentation trap or whatever. But basically, it's this: is that you cover the top of the container, and as whatever you're brewing is fermenting, it's actually producing carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide is pushing the oxygen out of the liquid. So when you're doing that, it's full of carbon dioxide at that point because actually oxygen makes will make the fermentation go bad. It'll make it go sour. So you want the carbon dioxide there because it just acts as basically like a sanitary layer, so that you're not contaminating what they call wort or I mean that's for beer, but whatever you are fermenting. So what you do with balloon is you do just you can actually buy these like little traps at a brewery store, and they're nice, and you fill them up with water or whatever. But you can replicate that with a balloon that you just poke a little pinhole in the balloon, and so that little pinhole just allows enough carbon dioxide and oxygen to release, and it'll fill up. And then you'll know when it's done when the balloon starts going limp, because then the fermentation is done.
Yeah, when it gets old.
Yeah, and so then you basically know, okay, at this point you can go ahead and bottle, because you don't want to bottle before the fermentation is done, because if you bottle before that, then you're gonna have what they call bottle grenades.
Yeah. Wait. Was it you that had it like all over the floor?
That's happened to me two different times. Two different times. I made a set of dandelion wine once, and I bottled it too early. In the middle of the night, I was hearing pop, 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 pop in the in my closet, and so like I look in, and it's just a total mess. Just the corks were shooting out of the bottles. But I've heard of people actually doing it with, beer bottles, and the actual bottle itself blows up. So then you got like glass everywhere and
Holy cow!
everything. So I never had to deal with that, but it's a lot of it's just trial and error, that type of stuff. I always try to use as little chemicals as possible when I'm brewing. But yeah, that was basically my first stint right there, and then I moved up to orange wine, and then just being how I am, I took that orange wine and then started experimenting some more, and so I did a process called jacking, which
We usually go through that around 12 years old.
yeah, well, this type of jacking takes a little bit more time than that. But no, basically what it is it's the opposite of distillation, in that you're well, I mean, you are distilling, but you're using the freezing method of doing it. And so you take your wine that's already got the alcohol in it, and then you put it into the freezer on the lowest setting, and then you start watching it turn to, well, it starts turning to ice or ice crystals, and you start scooping away those ice crystals, because that's water. So when you scoop away the water, the alcohol is still in there. So the more water you pull out, the more alcohol is going to be in there. But I learned a lesson here, and this is that. Don't do that. Because the big difference between distilling and jacking's like the poor man way of distilling. And yeah, you can get a high alcohol, but this is where I learned about the different types of alcohols that are in wine and in beer, and the different flavonoids or whatever, the stuff that gives you hangovers. You got ethanol, methanol. The ethanol is what you want, but it's like the methanol and like all the well, I think that's the wood alcohol. Those are the things that will, one, they'll make you blind.
Yeah, I was
like,
gonna
I mean,
ask. Yeah.
at high percentages, and that's why when they distill, you hear about distilling 2 or 3 times or whatever, because they're extracting all those bad alcohols out of it.
Yeah, it was. I think I had read a book one time, and it may have come from you. I don't remember, but it was talking about how the moonshiners and stuff like that. There were stories of people drinking like the first run,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, they'd end up like going blind and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, there's that, and you had the people in the hills
Or
that
made
were
'em crazy.
they'd build stills out of like old radiators that have lead in it, and so that's
Oh.
like where you have like the crazy guy with the shaky hands. I mean, he's pretty much like the Mad Hatter at that point, because he's drank so much moonshine and lead. Like, I mean, he's gone insane.
Yeah. Eating paint chips.
Yeah, pretty much. So like, I mean, that's kind of how I started off, and then I started getting into other things. I did my master's on, and this was back in 2005, and I did it on the American hard cider industry. And back then, if everybody recalls here, cider was not that big of a thing. You had like several different brands out there. You had Woodchuck was the big one. I think the wine company Gallo or whatever had Hornsby's, which I don't even think exists anymore.
Yeah, I didn't really know much about cider at all until I met you, and I still don't know a lot about cider, period. But it wasn't like a thing,
Hmm.
that I really knew about. And then you started getting into the bar scene and stuff, and all the girls are, drinking these
Well,
Angry Orchards and
yeah,
all that kind of stuff.
this was something that I had discovered when I was in Europe, because in Europe, when you go to any major city, they all have an Irish pub.
Yeah,
Every major city has an Irish pub. It doesn't matter if it's in the Czech Republic, in France, in Denmark, or any Scandinavian countries. For whatever reason, they all need to have an Irish pub, and that's where all the Irish people are, and the Irish and the British, and that's where they're serving those things. Well, started getting a liking towards cider, so I come back to Ohio, and Ohio's got a lot of apples. So I started studying different things and all this, and decided to do my master's on. Basically, it was how to create the industry, and what my thought was just because the limited supply of apples and where most apples were going was actually for just food consumption rather than for making alcohol. But there were different. I learned that there are different blends and stuff that you needed to make a proper cider. And so I started studying up on this, and I developed a couple blends. And I was blessed in that, like I lived close to Amish country, so when the fall came, you go down there, and there's just tons of apple orchards, and I mean, I didn't realize this, but like all the different varieties. So it was very easy for me to when I lived up there to put together a really decent blend, and so I did that for a couple years. Built like a cider press just out of 2x4s and a car jack. And no, I mean it worked perfectly. It really did work perfectly. Where I'd use a food processor and chop up all the apples with the seeds, the stems, everything. Throw it into cheesecloth, and then just press that down until I got the musk
right.
for the apple cider. And that's something I miss from Ohio, because like my cider tasted way different than what you end up seeing in
So,
the stores.
so when you went to these Amish colonies and stuff like that to pick out the apples and everything, did you have some sort of what is the word, a botanist background for the different types of apples, or
This was
um,
just self study. Um, I found a book. I forget what it's called. The guy's last name is Watson. For some reason, I do remember that. But it kind of went through and explained that you got like bitter apples, you got acidic apples, you got aromatic apples, and you need to really balance all those out to create a proper ciders. It's much different than say like with wine, where with wine a lot of times, yeah, you do have blends, but like a lot of times there's single variety wines. So like a Chardonnay comes from a Chardonnay grape.
hmm
It's pretty straightforward like that, right? Where ciders, you only have very, very few apple varieties that have the characteristics to be a single variety. So you need to have that blend of different apples. So it was kind of like just a fun thing to study and fun thing to experiment with. And I experimented with just trying out, like, okay, I'm just going to do this as a single variety and see if this is true. And it'd be like, okay, you could tell where it was lacking, where it'd be like, okay, it kind of tasted maybe very tart, but like watery or something like that.
hmm
Like that one apple, you just knew that it was lacking compared to whatever the blend was that I had developed. So,
That's pretty crazy. So I wanted to go back to something real quick because you were talking about you made dandelion mead, or no, dandelion wine,
yeah.
right? So what other I mean, there were a lot of people for a long time I didn't know that you could even eat dandelions or drink, dandelion tea and all that kind of
Or
stuff.
that you pronounce it like dandelion.
Yeah.
I didn't know that. It must be a Montana thing.
Yeah.
A dandelion. Tell
Uh,
me about
about
dandelion.
yeah, about. uh, but anyway, like I didn't know that you could even you could even eat that. So there's so many different things. Is there any other like um, maybe not known plants that you can make wines and all that kind of stuff out of?
I've made, you know what? Being a poor college student, I would go out like whenever anything I saw was fruiting. I'd go out and start making wine out of it. So, excuse me. If there was blackberries, for instance, I'd go and pick blackberries. Um, One of the things, do they call it down here choke cherries?
I don't know if they even exist here, but I know.
But they're wild cherries. They're like little tiny things that only birds eat, right?
Yeah, well, in Montana we have them, like, but
Yeah.
you have to race the Hutterites to get to them. The Hutterites for us is like Amish.
Okay.
They're like, well, I guess be semi sorta Mennonite,
Okay.
because they can wear colors, they can drive vehicles, um, but they are very much like a very family oriented
Mm-hmm.
group, and but anyway. They will go through and completely rape a harvest.
Oh, probably for jams.
Like all kinds of. They make choke cherry wines. They
Yeah.
make all kinds of stuff, and their
Let's-
choke cherry wine is freaking
Well, see,
outstanding.
and see, that was the thing. Like we had these two cherry trees in the back of my parents' yard, and so they like overhung. I mean, these things were tall trees. I mean, they're a good 100 foot tall or whatever. But the branches hung um, over the deck, and what I did was I laid down a bunch of tarps on the deck, and then I'd shake the hell out of those branches or whatever, and then they're just like these wee little berries. Like I mean, they're about, I would say a centimeter would probably be too big,
Wow.
and I mean they're just tiny things, but I took all these and then I put them through like a potato masher or whatever to extract all the juice and separate them from the seeds because you don't want the seeds fermenting with the juice and the fruit. So
The tannins would be
yeah, the
too high. Yeah.
tannins, yeah, exactly. And for what I didn't have, I subsidized just with store bought black cherries. And I'll tell you what, like I mean I didn't make that much of it, but this was probably one of my favorite wines that I made and probably could have stored well. I mean, it just had such a good solid cherry flavor. Like if you could picture fresh cherry wood, like
Mm-hmm.
when it's cut or whatever, that smell,
Mm-hmm.
and then put that into taste. I mean,
Oh wow. That'd
that's
be good.
what it was. So that was a fun one.
Did you guys have gooseberries?
We did not have, no, we don't have gooseberries. And gooseberries, that's the white currant, which is weird. Like apparently there was like laws here in North Carolina, South Carolina. I think they got rid of it in South Carolina. I think it still exists in North Carolina that you can't have currants because there's like some type of strange, I think it's like a mold or something that attacks certain trees or
Really?
pine trees. I think it attacks pine trees, and since we've got like big pine industry.
Oh, we do. I didn't
Oh,
know. I mean, because you really don't see that many pine trees down here.
no, you do, and when you get actually even further into Georgia, you definitely do.
Oh yeah, in Georgia, yeah, I've definitely seen
Yeah,
it in
but
Georgia.
that's where you get the southern yellow pine. I think is what is usually in Lowe's and Home Depot
Mhm.
is like that. That's the lumber we're using a lot of times. Um, but yeah, for some reason, yeah. But currants, I love currants.
Oh man, they're awesome.
Current wine is fantastic.
Oh yeah.
If I could do that. What's another fun one I've done? Spruce beer. I went to Colonial Williamsburg and got
Mhm.
like just a, it was like a random just like colonial book or something, and it had different recipes. I mean, it wasn't totally about brewing or whatever, but there was a brewing recipe in there for spruce beer. And the story of spruce beer was during the Revolution. George, like I mean, George Washington,
Mhm.
um, and the rest of the generals, whatever. They'd have their troops go out and pick the spruce buds in the spring, which are like the really really green
Mhm.
pieces. The reason that they did this was because they're packed full of vitamin C. They were
Yeah.
fighting scurvy in the field, and so
Well, they had a lot of like cured meats and stuff like that that they were
mhm,
dealing with. Yeah.
yeah. So okay, back then I'm sure everybody's learned about the triangular trade uh, that went on. The slaves going down in the Caribbean, then sugar coming up here, molasses coming up here, that type of thing. So we had a lot of molasses, and so that's how they'd make it. Is they'd take the spruce sprouts or whatever they're called, and they'd boil it in water, and then they'd add the molasses, and the molasses would act as the sugar for the fermentation, and they just throw regular bread yeast in there, and they'd brew it right there in the field, and that was that was their vitamin C sustenance to get them through their trek.
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't really have citrus fruits and
Right.
and that type of thing, and so
Well, you had brought it up. I'm glad you brought it up because that was one thing that I was surprised to learn when I did search and rescue in Montana was that you get a huge source of vitamin C from
pine needles.
pine needles and stuff
Hmm.
like that, and it's actually a really good like tea,
Hmm.
um, especially like during the fall and late summer and stuff like that. You stick some berries and some pine needles in there, man. It tastes actually
Yeah.
really good. Um, but
So
it,
that's a fun one that I made in the
yeah,
past. Down here though, I'm not really seeing any spruce trees though, so I haven't been
yeah,
able to. We have tons of them up in Ohio, so
yeah,
it wasn't hard to find. But we do have lots of pine trees down here, but I don't think it'd come out the exact same.
yeah, probably not. So you had actually told me a story, and I still have yet to be able to look this up. Not because I can't look it up; it's just I haven't had a chance to. Um, like cider, how cider actually got its start. Um, you'd say basically the water issue that they had here with clean water and everything like that, and sustenance and all that kind of stuff was such an issue.
Well, see, actually, the clean water was not an issue here per se, but the technology that we had back then. You have to understand we're coming from Europeans, and Europeans went through like the plague and all that other stuff, and they knew not to drink their water. They knew it, and so like what they would do is they'd make beer, and
That's why they're drunks.
that's why they're drunks. Well, but that would be their sustenance. And in fact, on that same point, the reason why the Mayflower decided to finally stop was actually because they ran out of beer. They're actually looking for a settlement along the coast, and why they picked what was Plymouth Rock or what they claim is Plymouth Rock or whatever. I think there's still a dispute on even that. But it was because they ran out of beer on the ship, and like the captain was like, "Okay, we're done searching. We need to stop now
Yeah,
and set camp up."
we got to wait a month and make some beer.
Yeah, because they didn't have any more sustenance. But that was their point of view. Was when they came here, it was don't okay. We don't trust the water in Europe because it's all polluted, and
Right.
you had sewage and the aqueducts and all this other stuff. But all that was like pretty much feeding back into
Yeah,
the
into their
same
water
stuff.
system.
Or yeah. So like beer was safe, water outside nature not so much. Strangely, here in the Americas, I mean, it was pretty pristine. They didn't realize this. Um, so they didn't really trust it for
Just a cultural norm, I
just a
guess.
cultural norm, exactly. But as things were developing, the whole thing coming back to the cider really comes back to the old story of Johnny Appleseed. And Johnny Appleseed, everybody thinks of him as like, okay, he's planting apples so that we can have apple pies, and he's wearing a pot on his head, and blah blah
Yeah.
blah blah blah. No, he was an entrepreneur. He was basically, I want to say, I don't know, I don't know if I should call him a land spectator, but he worked with the land spectators back then. They knew that they were moving out west. And west back then was like Pennsylvania and Ohio.
Hmm.
That like to them that was west. I mean, it wasn't Oklahoma and all that. But basically, what he did was he would go out there before the settlers had gotten out there years before, and he was just planting apple orchards, just apple trees everywhere, everywhere, everywhere. And the reason for it was is to boost up the value of the land because they knew when the settlers would go out there that they would have apples. And the settlers weren't thinking about the apples for making the pies or anything like that. What they were thinking about was so that they could make cider for sustenance through the winter. So if they didn't have enough meat or whatever, they'd have a decent amount of caloric intake. And so, I mean, they would have at least a barrel of cider at the end of the day.
Could you imagine your kids? I mean, you'd be, hey,
Get
hey,
them.
Johnny's not gonna sleep, so let's give him a little beer.
You know what? You didn't need the boob tube back then to put them to sleep. You just give them some cider. They just pass out. Like what the hell? It works perfectly. Uh,
Maybe that's where the whiskey on the gums thing came from.
yeah, yeah. So, but that's basically the story of Johnny Appleseed. And the whole thing there was is, and this is also an interesting thing with apple trees. Go ahead and like buy an apple from the store, plant it, and then let that tree grow, and then taste the apple, and then tell me if that tastes like a Granny Smith or anything else. It won't. It won't. A Granny Smith, any of those apples at the store, they're all grafted, which means they're clones.
Hmm.
They're taking a branch from another tree, they're grafting it onto a stump of another tree, and then that tree then grows because it's got that branch of that other apple.
So
That's the
basically,
clone,
what they're grafting it to is
the growing stock.
yeah, it's like what is the word? Um, Not artificial insemination. It's the host,
The host,
basically.
yeah.
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 There's a word for it, but I can't remember exactly what it's called. But like
Ultimately, yeah. Like I
yeah,
mean, it's there. The roots are what is bringing in the nutrients from the ground,
right.
and the fruit is in itself of its own growing off of that, growing off of those nutrients. And so the point of what I'm saying here is, so Johnny Appleseed, yeah, he's planting all these seeds out there. He doesn't know what any of them are going to taste like, but when you make cider, like again, you just need a variety of apples really to make a decent tasting cider or whatever, and that's all that it would be. It would just be, all right, apples from this tree, from this tree, from this tree. Throw it in this barrel here. Let's crush it and
Hmm.
whatever, and then you've got 50 gallons of cider to get you through the winter.
So did they know how to do grafting and stuff like that back then, or was it
They,
more of a modern?
I believe they knew somewhat because some of my research has pointed to certain apples that were popular back then, and they'll call them heirloom apples now, just because they're historical. But they're popular back in the day, like the Newtown Pippins. The one tree that I have in my backyard, I always brag about the Harrison, the Jersey Harrison tree, which it's got its own cool story of people thought that it disappeared during Prohibition, but then somebody discovered it, and now it's like kind of like the thing any cider producer once in their orchard is this Harrison, because back in the 1800s they called it.
Yeah, you've got one of those, I think, in your yard, don't you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They used to call it. God, I think I could be wrong here. Wait. What are the two towns in New Jersey? You got Trenton,
Trenton and
Newark.
yeah, you got Newark.
Okay, Newark, Champagne is
Yep.
what they used to call it. And Harrison was basically a single variety cider, and I think sometimes they'd mix it with another one. But it's a very special apple in that it was lost to history. So anybody that kind of follows this stuff, it's kind of like a prized tree to have. So I do have it, and unfortunately I live in South Carolina, and it's not all that conducive for apple production. So have not been able to make any cider out of it yet, but it's starting to get kind of big. So if we end up having a cooler year one year, I think
Well, it seems like it's starting to trend that way.
yeah, that's what they say.
I mean, because I know, like a lot of the northern states and stuff like that, they've had an extended winter, and shoot, I mean, it just snowed the other day in Montana.
Weather.com is scared that there's going to be flooding in the Great Lakes. That there's so much melt.
Yeah,
That,
there was a lot of flooding back home.
Yeah.
They actually shut down a bunch of roads and stuff like that, and
I saw the stuff. What is that? Nebraska or whatever?
oh yeah, Nebraska and
It was really bad.
like what is the Midwest, and they had a lot of flooding there too.
Yeah.
But yeah, like a lot of the snow runoff and stuff has caused a lot of flooding.
Yeah.
But so how did you get into soap making and stuff like that?
Soap making, I was unemployed for 2 weeks, and I'm generally somebody that if I have time on my hands, I either can be constructive about it or get myself into trouble.
You jack your alcohol.
Couple more minutes.
Alcohol makes it last longer.
Yeah. No, so I just decided, okay, I thought to myself, this was something that people used to know how to do, and I've always been fascinated by what people used to know how to do. I never really had anybody teach me those things.
Well, a lot of that stuff is lost art. I mean,
Yeah, it's a lost art, but I just never really had that necessarily in my family or my surrounding or whatever, and so like things like that just kind of always fascinated me. Of like, okay, how do you do this? Like, yeah, you can buy that at the store, but how is it done? People have had this for years, that type of thing. And so I started researching it, and I came up with like my first mold to do the soaps was a complete disaster. I decided to do like this like honeycomb grid design and pour each bar or whatever, and then realized, okay, that doesn't work at all. So I started looking a little bit further and realized that, okay, everybody does these big loaves of soap that then you cut everything. And once I was on the right track, then I was good. But with soap, like what you were saying earlier, just me being eccentric, experimental with things, it was like I didn't want to make just a white soap, I can buy that shit. I wanted to make things that I couldn't have, and that's usually what my mentality is. I want to make things that I've never tried.
yeah.
I mean, it's there's coming back to brewing. I brewed with like a lot of people that really want to make the quintessential clone to this particular beer or whatever, and I'm like,
Why? Just go buy
why?
it.
Yeah, just go buy it. Yeah, exactly. But I mean, there's some benefits to that. I mean, you met Bill, and
Oh,
Bill
yeah.
Bill he kind of brews like that.
I don't know. The Billweiser to me does not taste anything
Well,
like Budweiser to
yeah,
me.
yeah.
And obviously nobody here knows what Billweiser is, and so Bill had named this beer, and he kind of
he
perfected it. And,
what he did with this beer. I know we're jumping into soap here, but coming back to beer, uh, was he designed this beer like Budweiser, but he wanted it to be a lot.
better.
Yeah, he wanted it to be a large beer because everything Bill does is, I mean, he only does big beers, high octane beers for the most part. And so he wanted to take whatever was what could be Budweiser, but let's double the alcohol on that. So like I think the Billweiser ends up being like 8% or something ridiculous like that. And but it's like a lager all the same. He ages it on beech wood. It's filtered. Like I mean he does the whole exact same process for what Budweiser would be, but it's very very strong.
Yeah.
But it's very good too. It's very good. But he's done that like with like the German alt beer, and that's another one that is basically his flagship right there.
Yeah.
Everybody
Well,
knows
you
it.
and him made the pumpkin beer, right?
That was one time and that was a fun thing
That
right
was
there
good.
because we made several. That was an afternoon of fun right there. We decided to make pumpkin beer, but then it turned into like 5 different types of pumpkin beer when it was all said and done. Like I had my own batch, he had his own batch, then I had like leftover wort that I froze, and then like that I was topping off, but then I had so much of it that I ended up making like a really really high octane pumpkin beer that I ended up adding. What did I add to it? I think it was Myers Black Rum or something.
Mm.
But I mean, it aged well. Like I mean, I let this stuff sit for like 3 years. When I opened that bottle, whew, man, it was good. It was freaking good. It's probably one of the best beers I ever made right there. But like I mean,
Yeah.
that's what you can do with brewing.
I'd say that is the hardest part about
Waiting.
yeah, is the waiting, because I mean you want to try it so bad,
Yeah.
you know, and like that blackberry mead that I made,
Mhm.
I had some of that for shoot, I think it was like 2 years,
Mhm.
2.5 years, something like that, before I and the last bottle was over at Gina's house, and we had it that one time, but um, yeah, that was by far the hardest part about that whole process was just waiting the amount of time before you. And the weird thing is though, like, so I had several bottles of that stuff, and like you could taste the difference over a certain amount of time. Like, had one at I think like 3 months, and then I had another one at like 6 months to 8 months, something like that, and then I had some more at, and it was like you go further on and you
Mhm.
like taste the difference, and it's really,
It's fun
yeah, it is just a lot
because
of
it
fun.
does it. Like I mean, as it matures or whatever, whatever's going on in that process, it changes. And I mean, outside of being like a home brewer, I mean, it's the same thing with certain wines that they say, okay, this wine it ages well. Okay, it might age well, but like you'll open it up when it's young and it's like a vibrant red.
Yeah.
But then it'll be 20 years old and it's like this like weird brown color, but it tastes fantastic.
Hmm.
But it's like whatever's in it is allows it to age well. I mean, some wines just don't age well.
Yeah. Yeah, I've been really fascinated with the whole mead making process. Probably because I keep bees and all that kind of, take them out
Hmm.
of people's houses and stuff. But um, yeah, I just completely, like, I've been enthralled in that whole aspect, and um, I still kind of kick myself for making mead out of that buckwheat honey a while back,
Why is
because
that?
you know how many people I've had tell me that that was the best honey that they've ever had in their life.
I'd be probably one of those people because I remember when he had that buckwheat honey, it was freaking wonderful.
Yeah. Well, there's actually people that went to Gina's restaurant because I was selling a bunch of jars and stuff at Gina's restaurant, and Edith had just told me this not too long ago that they were they came back and they were like, "Hey, so you guys had honey? Does that was the best honey that I've ever had in my life?" Well, the last time I had sold it at that restaurant was that buckwheat honey.
Hmm.
And I was like, yeah, I'm going to have to go up on the price on that stuff because one, it's hard to get. It's pretty damn rare. And
Well, it's seasonal.
it's definitely seasonal and it's buckwheat is harder and harder to come by, like getting bees and stuff by those areas.
Hmm.
And so yeah, I was like, damn, I should have charged more. but uh, but yeah, I mean, the whole mead making process is pretty neat.
Now, did you flavor the buckwheat, or were you making straight buckwheat?
No, I flavored it.
Oh,
So
see, I would have done the straight buckwheat just to get that buckwheat flavor.
see, and that was the thing. Like I was so new to it, and I mean, I still don't know shit, but I was so new to it that I didn't even. That I thought almost that you had to flavor it, otherwise it was just going to taste like alcohol.
Yeah.
you know. And it wasn't until later on that I started learning. Oh well, shit, you didn't have to do that.
Whenever I've made mead, I wouldn't use this for flavoring, but like I said earlier, I don't like to use many chemicals. I mean, just kind of like just the way that I do it. And when it comes down to mead, you do need to add nutrients because there's not enough in the honey a
Well,
lot
see,
of
and
times
that
for
was
the
the
yeast.
thing. Yeah, that was the thing too that I thought was,
Yeah.
you had to add something to it
Yeah. And
because of that.
any time that I've done it, it's what I would do is I would make one really really strong cup of green tea, and that would act as my tannin.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking putting it into a 5 gallon batch. So like one cup isn't going to affect the flavor of a 5 gallon batch all that much, but it's going to add some tannin to it. And as far as acid goes, like a lot of times they'll use what is it, tartaric acid. I might be pronouncing that wrong, but I would just use citric acid, and basically what my substitute was is lemons. Just
Yeah, I mean that makes sense.
just a couple lemons or whatever, and that was my acid addition for mead. But I mean, that's kind of the funny thing with mead is that, yeah, you do need to kind of baby it a little bit more, and it takes longer. The fermentation is a much longer fermentation than maltose or sucrose
Mm-hmm.
sugars would be.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So anyway, back to the soap because
Okay.
we're back to back to drinking.
Well,
Although
maybe you should have some bars of soap sitting in front of me instead of like bottles of mead and, well,
and scotch.
scotch.
Well, you got a beer right there too. But
And sadly, that's just seltzer.
something we maybe could do is just let this go long and then
That's all right.
and then do a part two, like part two podcast or whatever.
That's
But
fine. Take a break and.
yeah, definitely. Actually, let's do that.
Okay.
So that way we can keep talking about getting drunk.
We can move into the soap and the other things here.
Yeah. So, so what do you what is your favorite like wines or beers or whatever to make, or do you just enjoy making the?
I enjoy making. I really have in the later years enjoyed making beer, and that's partly just because of the people that I've met here in Greenville in doing so.
Part of the Brutopians and
Yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah. There's a club here, and I don't know if it still exists, but it was the Upstate Brutopians. A little shout out to everybody. But no, that was just fun, just meeting new people and seeing what they were doing, that type of thing. There weren't I never really got into a group of people making wine, but I mean, to me, making wine was just okay. It like what we were talking about earlier. It's whatever is in harvest at that time. You know, I still to this day. I mean, it's springtime, and
Hmm.
I look around and I see fields of white clovers, and
Oh man,
I'm
yeah.
like, I God, I could go out there and spend an afternoon popping all the little heads off those white clovers or whatever, and I can make some wine because it's a pretty damn good wine,
You know what?
actually.
Maybe we should try that. Maybe because I obviously can get the honey. Maybe we make like clover. You know, we use clover honey, and
Yeah,
then
clover honey with the clover heads,
yeah,
the flowers. Yeah, we
yeah,
could.
and see how that ends up being.
Yeah.
You know, like we were talking about doing the blackberries or whatever,
Hmm.
or black raspberries or whatever they call them down in South Carolina. Um, but yeah, let's do that. Let's try it.
We can do
Let's
that.
see what that comes out.
Yeah, yeah, that'd be good.
I suppose if we don't get a no, we've picked quite a few of them. I don't know how much we'd need, but we could always freeze them. And
But that's what used to always do is I'd go out one afternoon, pick so many, then I just throw it in the freezer, and I mean that's how I do like dandelion wine or, um, yeah, and the clover wine. Dandelion, you just basically do the same thing, except you pull off the green part in the back because you just want the petals. But I pop the heads off, get it all in, and put them in Ziploc bags, throw them in the freezer, and then like one afternoon I just open those bags and then pull out the petals because that's what you want, and then just discard. You know, takes a lot of work, but I mean that makes a wonderful wine. But this is South Carolina. I don't really see very good dandelions down here. Up in Ohio, we have awesome dandelions.
yeah, I know. Like during the late summer and stuff like that, I didn't like. I don't like to kill any of the dandelions and stuff because of the
Yeah, with the
bees
bees
and
now.
all that
Yeah.
kind of stuff. Yeah, and so I don't put any pre-emergence or anything like that down or
Hmm.
um, that kind of stuff. So I know there's a crap ton of dandelions that end up popping up, but I haven't seen a lot this year
Which
so
is weird
far.
because we've had a pretty decent amount of rain, but I just don't really see them like what I see like what's prevalent up in Ohio.
Yeah, yeah, up no, up north it seems like there's a bunch of them. Um, so there's another um, like dang, there's another plant that they use a lot. Like a lot of the old timers talk about it, and
Chicory.
maybe
It's like with the purple flower.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
I see a lot of that down here.
Have you tried anything with that?
I have not. I have not. I want to know if it's the same chicory as what they put in New Orleans coffee. I honestly don't know. I'm kind of ignorant when it comes to this, but it's something that I've had in the back of my mind. And then like I looked at the plant, and yeah, it's called chicory, and
Hmm.
it looks like a dandelion, but
Yeah,
it's got like a purple head on it.
yeah, yeah.
But it looks like the dandelions down here, where it's like a
Hmm.
long stem, and that's not the same that's in Ohio. So I don't even know if that's dandelion down here. That's the thing.
Yeah. Um, not really sure, but so what other sorts of different like maybe wild herb type or flowery type wines have you made?
Well, you know, like when we're talking about like the mead, I think you had what did I tell you? Cherry and rosemary, I think is what it was.
Yep, cherry rosemary. Yeah,
Yeah,
that was good, man.
it
That
seemed
was
like
great
that.
cooking wine.
Yeah, and you know what? I think that came out of just my experience with just being in the kitchen, being experimental. My wife thinks I'm a great chef. I just think that it's I'm cooking. It's just something that I enjoy, and like I said, I like trying new things, and I've gotten her to the point where she likes to try new things, and so she trusts that a little bit more than what she was in the past or whatever. Like she would never have eaten oysters, but now she loves oysters. Uh, so I think that's pretty much where that kind of comes out. God, I mean, I made so many in the past. I just
Yeah, I had that one that was a chocolate cherry that it actually turned out pretty good.
I did
Uh,
make a. I made an aphrodisiac
oh, I think I
burnt
remember that.
burnt mead one time. That was fun. And what I did was I took the honey and I burned the honey in a pan first before fermentation. So
That's
like I
such a
pulled
sin.
out. Yeah, so I pulled out. Yeah, but I was giving it that like
Yeah,
that burn flavor to it. Yeah, it's pulling out all the nutrients. I realized that, but I was like,
yeah,
reducing
but you're
the
doing it
amount
anyway.
of water that was in it and giving it that smoky kind of flavor. And then I threw in a bunch of supposed aphrodisiacs inside. I think I flavored it with strawberry and chocolate was actually in there, but then it was like this set of herbs, and I can't remember what all the herbs were, but um, it actually came out pretty good. And I gave one to my friend for when he got married, because that's actually that's an interesting fact right there. Why they call it the honeymoon? They call it the honeymoon for a wedding was because traditionally back in the day, and I think it was the Celtic people that they would get the, as a gift for the first 2 weeks of marriage enough mead to get them through those first 2 weeks so that they could have a baby. So that they're basically
Wow.
just drunk on mead for the first 2 weeks because mead was believed to give you a lot of sustenance and a lot of energy and so the first 2 weeks, yeah, you're supposed to knock her up, and
Wow. I
so that's
didn't
why they
know.
call it the honeymoon.
Yeah, I didn't know that. That's actually pretty interesting.
Or it might, no, actually, I think it was the whole month. That's why it's moon, honeymoon. It's not two
Oh,
weeks.
okay. So
It's
the
the
full
first,
phases
yeah,
of the moon, yeah.
the honeymoon. So you're supposed for the full. That was the wedding gift for the bride and the groom was
That is a
enough
shit ton of mean.
enough mead to get them through for 1 month.
Yeah, have you ever? I'm sure you've drank with the Irish.
Like,
That's
I'm sorry, sir, but yeah, Irish.
yeah.
I'm
You're.
not buying that.
I think that was Scottish.
Yeah, well, yeah. Last name's
But
Wallace. Come on.
yeah, but well, anything else you want to say before we cut this one off, take a break, and then
Let's take a break.
we'll do another one. Talk more about soaps and all kinds of other lost arts and stuff like that.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right. Thank you for listening to episode 7 of the Archery Outdoorsman podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you check out episode number 8, where we continue. Like I had said in the intro, we broke this up. So definitely check out episode number 8. We get a little tipsy, and we really get off on some rabbit trails. So it's a good one. So I highly recommend episode number 8. Like and subscribe, and make sure you continue to follow the Archery Outdoorsman podcast.